Hello, my friends, and welcome back to yet another episode of Watching the Watchers Live. My name is Robert Gruler. I am a criminal defense attorney here at the R&R Law Group, and today we're talking about Ghislaine Maxwell again. The court is on a little bit of a hiatus, but that doesn't mean that there is not a lot of activity that we can get into, and so we are going to do that. We're going to start off with Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan. The podcaster? Yeah, the podcaster. And the guy who does UFC, that guy. He is now talking about this case, as is everybody. Ghislaine Maxwell, of course, is sort of percolating through the public zeitgeist. And a lot of people raising their eyebrows about the prosecution's performance in this case. A lot of people instinctively know that this is a big case. This is a big meatball, as we say, and we're wondering why the government isn't taking a big bite out of it. It seems sort of a little bit lacking in terms of a prosecution. And so Joe Rogan actually brought up a very interesting meme that is going around on the internet and on the Twitterverse talking about these hard drives and this sealed evidence that maybe was given over to Epstein or the Maxwells back during the FBI investigations. So juicy stuff. We actually pulled the photos that Joe Rogan is talking about. We're going to see if we can debunk it or at least understand what's going on with this entire ordeal. Or not. We're also going to poke around the media and see what other people are saying about this. Mike Cernovich is saying that this is a massive cover-up. We've got Jack Posobiec basically saying the same thing. There's tens of thousands of images and recordings and all sorts of evidence of really horrendous activity, and the government just seems like they're just all going to make it all about Ghislaine Maxwell, and that's going to be it. So we're going to take a look around what's happening in the media and also take a look at that article from The Atlantic that we talked about earlier. I think it was this week, or maybe it's only Tuesday, yesterday, or maybe it was late last week, talking about Steve Jobs' wife, Laurene Powell Jobs. She's basically the owner of this media organization called The Atlantic. And The Atlantic wrote a very interesting article about trafficking. And David Frum and a lot of interesting people are saying it's not that big of a deal, which is kind of interesting. So we'll see what the media has to say about that. Then in our next segment, we're going to do an expert witness preview. Of course, the trial is on hiatus, but Ghislaine Maxwell, her defense is set to start on Thursday. We're ironing out a lot of the procedures still. Maxwell's defense team has told everybody that they're going to call something like 35 witnesses, and the prosecutors are saying that's more than we called. We didn't even call 35 people. So they're trying to iron out the procedure of these witnesses and how the whole trial is going to continue to unfold. And so we're going to talk about that. We're going to have a preview of the defense expert witnesses, including taking a look at two experts, Dr. Loftus and Dr. Park Dietz. These are two people who are going to come out here and talk about one of the main themes of the defense, memory, and how memory is just really terrible. So we'll take a look at that. And then in our last segment, we've got Prince Andrew. Remember Prince Andrew and Virginia Giuffre? Remember that very salacious photograph of Prince Andrew grinning ear to ear with this, what looked to be like an underage girl next to him, with Ghislaine Maxwell sort of smirking in the background. Remember that photograph? Well, there were a bunch of lawsuits that came out as a result of that photograph. Virginia Giuffre suing Prince Andrew for two different violations. One, battery for the physical contact. Number two, intentional infliction of emotional distress. Prince Andrew has been pretty mum about this thing over in the UK for quite some time, but his defense attorneys just responded. They're asking the court for a motion to dismiss, and we're going to go and take a look at that. Quick announcement, if you don't stick around for the whole show, tomorrow we're going to have a little bit of a change on the show. We're going to do a 1-hour pre-show here. So from 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern time here tomorrow, we're going to do just a mind map overview, and it's very likely that the mind map is going to be public as of tomorrow. So right now it's only for local supporters, but very likely I'll just make it public tomorrow, and we'll do sort of an open Q&A tomorrow from 6 to 7 p.m. Then from 7 to, I think, 9 Eastern, I'm going to go on Viva's channel with Joe Neerman, Good Logic, and we're going to talk about Ghislaine Maxwell for Sidebar with Viva and Barnes. And so make sure, if you're not already subscribed, that you're aware of that, because it's going to be a short show tomorrow, and then we're all just going to pick up and we're going to go over to his house and we're going to have a conversation there. And so if you want to be a part of the show, the place to do that is over at watchingthewatchers.locals.com. There's a form over there that looks just like this. If you ask a question here, we will do our very best to get to those. We also have a clips channel. So on this show, what we're doing is clipping up the different segments and putting them on a different channel. So if you want to share these clips, please feel free to do that. over there. All right. And so we've got a lot to get to. Ghislaine Maxwell trial is still moving forward, but we're not actually in trial today. So we're taking a look at a lot of the conversation surrounding the trial and, of course, taking a look at what's happening on the court docket. Motions are still flying all over the place. But as exhibits are coming out, as new photographs are being leaked out to the internet or being published after trial, people from the internet, like myself, like you, are taking a look at them. We're able to dive into the photographs and ask ourselves some questions. We did a lot of that here. We went through a lot of the exhibits from Epstein's Palm Beach location, from Zorro Ranch over in New Mexico. We spent a lot of time talking about the New York mansion and all of those redacted photographs that were hanging off of the walls. But there was one photograph that really raised a lot of eyebrows. And we talked about it here. We actually reviewed it. And now Joe Rogan has his eyeballs on it, talking about it with Blair White. Blair White, of course, a big online personality, and she went to visit with Joe Rogan, and they were talking about the Ghislaine Maxwell case. And a lot of people just sort of feel kind of icky about this whole thing and like something is a little bit off, askew, wrong, when the U.S. government has been investigating allegedly this case for the last 2 decades or so, and then they only have 8 days of trial for their prosecution. Whereas like a Derek Chauvin trial, for example, 11 days for his prosecution. Derek Chauvin, 1 victim, 1 date of offense, 1 incident. Ghislaine Maxwell's, well, multiple victims, multiple incidents, multiple locations, islands, New Mexico, Florida, New York, the whole thing. Very complicated case, been percolating for a long time. 8 days, though. Less than Derek Chauvin. So we all can just kind of feel like something is a little bit amiss here, including Joe Rogan. Here's what he said on his podcast talking about Ghislaine Maxwell.
Just banned the Ghislaine. How do you say it?
I know.
Ghislaine
Maxwell, the trial
You say
tracker.
Ghislaine? Is that how you say it?
I think it's Ghislaine, yeah.
Do you know how to say it, Jamie? Ghislaine? You think so?
I've never heard her say it, but I think that's how you say
I
it.
I like to
it's
say Ghislaine because it's funny.
That's better. Let's go with that.
Ghislaine Maxwell.
Ghislaine.
Her the tracker.
Got yeeted.
Yeah, but it got yeeted for what? Did you see what it got yeeted for? The last post? It was.
No.
They showed that a bunch of evidence that was introduced already had FBI tags on it, which means the FBI had access to all of these CDs, all of these hard drives, all of these things, had reviewed them, and then had allowed them to be brought back in for evidence, supposedly. See if you can find it. Because it's posted up. A lot of people have reposted it. Under threat
this
of banning.
like Streisand affect it? Because there's people who are just gonna ad nauseum just
well,
fucking trial
you're
tracker, right?
smarter than the feds. Congratulations.
In a way, but also that account had a huge following very quickly. I think it had like
Yeah.
400K followers very quickly.
530,000.
Yeah.
And they just banned it.
And that's what's like, okay, so there's all this media attention for the Rittenhouse thing. You can't turn on the TV without seeing it, which it was a big deal. And it you know, I think a lot of American issues were kind of going head to head over that trial. But like the Ghislaine Maxwell thing, I feel like is so much more to the public interest, or it should be, because it's like you have Hollywood and the elites and people connected to politics preying on young girls. And the fact that that's not of a higher priority in people's attention span is really sad, I think.
Yeah, well, there's a lot, I think, that goes into that, including, you know, sort of a needling to some degree. You know, I mean, the media goes in on the Kyle Rittenhouse situation and needles that specifically. White supremacist, black versus white, the whole thing, you can see where it goes from there. Not a lot of that, though, going on here with the Ghislaine Maxwell stuff. We've got some Netflix documentaries and things, and there has been a lot of attention on it, no doubt about it. But you know, as a sort of moral, pending, urgent societal issue, the Ghislaine Maxwell trial has not really felt like that to me. You know, when we're watching Rittenhouse, when we're, on Ricada's channel, when we're watching everybody talk about this, you sort of get this feel, this energy throughout America that this is about self-defense, dang it. This is about the right to keep and bear arms. This is about self-preservation. This is about due process and the presumption of innocence and all of those things. That was very important during the Rittenhouse saga, and a lot of society was sort of invested in that. But with Ghislaine Maxwell, a lot of it is just sort of, people don't want to talk about it. I mean, it is so horrendous. I mean, a lot of the things, the allegations here involving 14-year-old girls being trafficked around the world to some of the most powerful people on the planet, people like Prince Andrew, people like Bill Clinton, people like Jeffrey Epstein, and many other of the Hollywood elite, and many other people who are in the phone book and a part of the flight logs. Everywhere you look, it's horrendous. but nobody wants to talk about it because it involves some really, disgusting, thoughtful, awful things to think about. And it's of critical importance. I mean, this is sort of, real evil that you're talking about on the face of it. And if the U.S. government, if the prosecutor's office is justified for anything, if they have a basis for existing at all, isn't it for that? I mean, isn't it to stop sort of evil? Isn't it for society to round up and say, we really need you to focus on the most egregious stuff ever? Stop prosecuting people for marijuana violations. Stop prosecuting innocent people like Kyle Rittenhouse. How about you use all your resources and go after the actual evil people on the planet? We elevate that to a little bit of a higher priority, but it just hasn't felt like that. Maybe you disagree. Maybe the sort of the public zeitgeist has been, more behind this, but I just haven't seen it really. It's not that same level of urgency that we saw with Kyle Rittenhouse. What Joe Rogan was also saying, though, he was talking about those CDs and these hard drives and these bits of evidence that were found at a part of Epstein's raid, part of his mansion during the FBI raid that took place some time ago. And he was saying, those CDs and those hard drives and things, there may be indications that the FBI already had those. They were already sealed, is what he said. These bits of evidence might have already gone through the government and ended up back in Epstein's place, is what he was saying. Because when they took photographs, it looks like this evidence had already been processed and then back and returned back to Epstein, is what he's saying. And we took a look at a lot of these photographs. Remember this one? This was Exhibit 926. And this is one of those photos that Joe was talking about, saying, remember all those CDs? Well, in this, we see CDs. Say the FBI agents or whoever was doing the raid, they just walked in, they opened up a drawer, they took a photograph. You can see there is a diploma. We're going to zoom in on that, but this doesn't really look processed to me. When you zoom in a little bit, you can see on this side, right? These are just CDs that are put in their little jewel cases and thrown in a drawer. Doesn't look like evidence has been processed. Over here, we can take a look at the diploma. Same thing. Kind of really hard to read what's on there. It looks like some math, some fractions and limits, and who knows what that says. But that was a part of this drawer. And so this doesn't really sort of feel like it rings the bell that Joe is talking about. Joe's talking about evidence that looks like it's already been produced. Here we can see another shot. 812, and this is Selena AV Shoot 2, AV Photos, another Selena 2, right? More CDs. But then you get to this photograph. Now, this is the photograph that Joe was really talking about, I think. The idea that these are hard drives, and these hard drives have evidence tape on them that looks like it's been cut. We zoom in a little bit, and you can see that exactly. Doesn't it look exactly like that? Somebody took a yellow strip of evidence tape and sealed the box of the hard drive, right? And so if you've never bought a hard drive, it's just like any other piece of technology. You open it up, it's sealed, you open it, and there's going to be a piece, a device in there. And we talked about this hard drive and talked about, it's kind of a weird thing that he would have all of these. Obviously, he had a bunch of CDs. CDs, as we know, only hold so much data, and these look like they're kind of the big ones too. This is 4.7 gigabytes over here. So you can squeeze a lot of stuff on that from an AV shoot, whatever that is, but still not enough. So he needed more hard drives. He needed more stuff to store more data. And so we see evidence tape, cut here, but we also see, looks like Xeroxes, photocopies of the actual hard drive. And so if you poke around on the internet, you can actually find that model. It looks like this. This is a Seagate PATA-100 Barracuda 3.5-inch internal hard drive. We've got a 750 gigabyte model over there, and we have a 320 gigabyte model over here. And you can see when you actually open it up, it's going to show you a metal device. This is a hard drive. If you've never played around with computers or anything like that, that's what it looks like. But that's what the old style, before they were solid state drives, when they were sort of the spinning mechanical drives, that's what they look like. And so when you go back over to this photograph, it sort of looks like what they did was open up these boxes, pull out the physical drive, make a copy of the drive so that they could register the serial number and identify it, tape it to the outside, and then put the hard drive back in the box and then seal it back up. would be sort of the way that you do this. Now, this is something that happens all the time in law. Okay, you have evidence that comes out from the outside world, and you have to process it and document it and analyze it. So in a DUI case, in Arizona, we have a two blood vial system. So if you get pulled over for a DUI and they suspect that you're impaired, they're going to pull you over and they're going to draw 2 vials of blood. And there's going to be an evidence kit that the officer basically cuts open and unseals to make sure that it's all sterile and it's safe and nothing's been contaminated and it's a legitimate piece of criminal investigative evidence. You can't just, he can't just sort of rummage around in his glove box and be like, oh, I got a couple blood vials here. All right, well, give me your arm there, John, and I'm going to start ejecting blood, right? This is all, it has to be sterile and legitimate and reliable beyond the any reasonable doubt. So this all has to be organized and sealed properly. So in a DUI case, they draw 2 vials of blood. They put it up, they label it and they put it in a bag and they seal everything up, and then that gets stored into evidence. And then when it goes into evidence and it goes actually into the crime lab, then somebody from the crime lab is going to actually take back out that same sealed piece of evidence and they're going to open it up. And there's a whole process by which they cut it and open it up, and they take the first vial out and they move it over here, take the second vial out, open it, pipette it, put it, and they do the whole analysis that way. Then they seal it back up. They seal that first vial, the one that they opened and that we would argue they contaminated. That's why they give us a second vial, so we have our own test tube so that we can test it ourselves if we wanted to. But they say, okay, we're going to seal that back up. If they need to come back out and get more blood out of it, they can. If they need to do additional testing, they can. The defense would make a bunch of arguments, but it's not unusual to have this process whereby you're opening stuff up and then pulling stuff out and then examining it and then putting it back in and then sealing it back up. That's not unusual at all. It happens all the time. Okay, so you might exactly be looking at that. So if Joe Rogan is saying, well, all these things are sort of, it looks like that they have been previously messed around with, it could have just been part of the ordinary process. And so when we're doing our analysis, now you're saying, okay, we got all these hard drives. Looks like they've all been opened and examined. It might have been done by the police. Here, the FBI raided this property. Where was this, Rob? That all makes sense. Okay, got it. I'm following you. Sounds like maybe it has in fact been processed, as we can see. Evidence tape and Xerox and copies and all that stuff. So the big question, of course, is where was this photograph taken? Because if this photograph that we see here, if this was taken at the evidence facility, well, then that would make sense, wouldn't it? If this was taken back after it was impounded, if this is sitting on a shelf somewhere at the FBI location, well, then that makes perfect sense. Oh, okay, so those are all the hard drives that came out of Epstein's mansion, and we process them, and we just put them in a bin somewhere, and we're just storing it as evidence, right? If the photograph were taken at one of those locations. But it wasn't. Guess what? Where was that photo taken? At Epstein's residence. See, this is where it comes from. So it wasn't being stored at the FBI facility. No, it wasn't at all. In fact, those hard drives were being stored at Epstein's mansion under his bookshelf. So yeah, it kind of does look like that there was evidence that was sealed and processed, and there were Xerox copies, and there was all sorts of bad stuff on there. Maybe it was in fact processed by law enforcement, and then it did in fact end up back in Epstein's hands, and he just threw it under his bookshelf. Run out of storage. So this was not a photograph taken at the FBI location. This was a photograph taken during the raid. And he has what certainly looks like a bunch of government evidence or processed evidence sitting around his property. And so a lot of people are obviously asking very pertinent questions about this. Does it feel like a cover-up? Well, Mike Cernovich says it is. Says, we learned nothing new during the Ghislaine Maxwell trial. James Comey's daughter made sure the Epstein documents seized will never be made public. He says, this is the most evil cover-up in my lifetime. A lot of people are feeling that way. Now, he posted that back on December 9th. That was some time ago. Posobiec is also pointing this out, says, we now know the FBI uncovered 20,000 images from Epstein's mansion in Manhattan. None of those are being entered into the Maxwell case. He says, this isn't an investigation. This is a cover-up. And so a lot of people obviously have that same mindset when you have the entire Justice Department resting their case after 8 trial days? Yeah. I mean, it sort of feels lacking, doesn't it? So what else is out there that maybe was covered up? Well, JudicialWatch, they filed a Freedom of Information Act request, and they were able to dig in a little bit further on the Bill Clinton-Ghislaine Maxwell connection. You can see this here. The United States Secret Service is providing an update over to JudicialWatch. And we've got this came out from October 2021, showing the connection between Clinton and Maxwell. Here we can see in the document that a lot of this stuff is being redacted. That's what B6 and B7C all means. It's redacted. It's all for privacy and personal information and stuff. So it's telling you that somebody sent something to somebody. This is all Secret Service stuff. It says, thanks, John. Info helps. I'll have the preliminary sent to my office by this evening so we can get out tomorrow. We got a manifest here from Osaka to LA. Hasn't been confirmed, but this shouldn't deviate too much. Who's on the flight list? We got 2 people. F. POTUS Clinton, so former president of the United States Clinton. We have B6, B7C, all sorts of additional redactions. Don't know who else is on the flight. And then we get Ghislaine Maxwell. So you've got those 2 peds in a pod right there. F. POTUS Clinton and Ghislaine Maxwell. We have the rest of the crew that's on the itinerary. We get an update from Secret Service. Says, I just received an updated manifest for the trip to LA. Got some additional names coming. Sorry, hopefully this doesn't create too many issues for you. Here's the passport list. We're going from India to Los Angeles, stopping in Japan for fuel. President William J. Clinton, and then we scroll down, Ghislaine Maxwell. Secret Service says, yeah, no problem. We have 4 crew members, 12 staff. I'll have food and drinks waiting for them. Yeah, shouldn't change anything drastically. All you guys in Honolulu have made my job a lot less difficult. Thanks for your help. I know you guys have been run through the ringer, so if I can just help make their trip a little easier, then we'll do that. I heard that when they flew from Oslo to Hong Kong, fuel was nothing. They didn't eat the entire trip. Don't want that to happen again. So Secret Service and the flight crew was, of course, making this, a nice flight for Ghislaine and the former president. We want to make sure that they travel in comfort all around the world as they're just hopping around from place to place, doing good deeds like 2 good people. Okay. We also see this is the last thing here. 2 names again, F. POTUS Clinton and Ghislaine Maxwell. And so you see, there's a lot of connections here that are all slowly working their way out through FOIA requests, through internet sleuthing, the list goes on and on. A lot of people are making another interesting connection, saying that this photograph is curious. You can see this actual photograph is floating around the internet, but I have it censored for all of our eyeballs, just to protect our eyeballs. Ghislaine Maxwell is a little bit exposed in that photograph. She's in a bathing suit. She's not nude, but she's letting it hang out there. And she is hanging out with this woman. Who is this woman? We're going to learn in a minute. First question, of course, is who is taking this photograph? Kind of a weird photo to be taking. She's got an iPad in her lap. She's looking at this photo. She's kind of, spread open in her bathing suit, and somebody's taking photographs. Kind of a weird photo, but we don't have to look at it. So we're just going to identify the connection here. The woman that she is sitting with is this woman, Laurene Powell Jobs. Josh Lekach on Twitter was the person who I saw made this connection first. Laurene Powell Jobs owns this company called The Atlantic. The Atlantic is a very popular online, website where they write articles. And Laurene Powell Jobs, Steve Jobs' former wife, the organization that she runs it posted an article that we'll get into in a minute. Let's make sure that she is who we think she is. Michael Calderon over at Politico says that Laurene Powell Jobs solidifies control of The Atlantic. Bradley relinquishes duties. It's a magazine now. It seeks a CEO from the outside to chart the exquisitely hard work of media strategy. And so a lot of people are, getting a little bit critical of these millionaires and billionaires, these people who own these gigantic media companies, people like Jeff Bezos, who says, well, I just want to buy the Washington Post now so that I have a newspaper. And do you think that that's a nice tool to have if you're a billionaire and you want to control public opinion? Of course it is, which is why Laurene Powell Jobs, of course, wants to run The Atlantic. And right as we're in the middle of this trial with Ghislaine Maxwell, You saw the photograph between Laurene Powell Jobs and Ghislaine Maxwell. The Atlantic posts this article from Kaitlyn Tiffany. It calls it the great fake trafficking epidemic. Like the whole thing's just a big fake. It's just a big faker. The whole thing's just fake news. Okay, so here's what this journalist said. Well, stereotypical kidnappings. What you picture when you hear the words, they hover around 100. Trafficking also occurs in the United States. A hotline has been operated. It recorded direct contacts with 14,500 likely victims of trafficking of all ages. Organization itself doesn't regard its figure for direct contacts as one that should be used with too much confidence. It's probably low, they said. But this is a wildly circulated number. Something like 800,000 children go missing. Figure shows up on t-shirts. But the number doesn't really mean what people think it means. Comes from a study conducted in 1999. It's an estimate about runaway children, runaways, non-family abductions that just aren't reported. Later in the report, the authors note that only a fraction of the 1% of children who were reported missing had not been recovered. So it's just kind of like fake news. It doesn't even really matter. Justice Department repeated the study in 2013 and found the reports of missing children had, quote, significantly decreased. So the takeaway, of course, is that it's just kind of a big fake epidemic. It's not even anything to really worry about. Don't worry about it. If you're paying attention to Ghislaine Maxwell, if you're somebody who's taking a look at all these weird connections between Ghislaine Maxwell, President Clinton, between Harvey Weinstein, Jeffrey Epstein, all of Hollywood, the list goes on and on. Nothing to see here. Don't worry about it. It's not even a big deal. It's all fake anyways. Not really. We have the one and only Viva. He is here. He posted this on Twitter. And as I mentioned at the start of the show, we're going to be on his channel tomorrow. But he's talking about this, and he notices some other guy named David Frum, who's, I think, used to be a conservative or something, is also saying this isn't a big deal. And so this narrative is now sort of taking off across the public airwaves as though this is a reasonable perspective to take when it involves children. Here is Viva spreading the good word.
I don't know when it was disclosed that his name was in Jeffrey Epstein's infamous Black Book, but it is. The same week that David Frum, the senior editor of The Atlantic, tells us on Twitter, get over here, that there is no trafficking problem. There is no child unlawful problem going on in the world. And if you think there is, you believe in a conspiracy theory and you can never be convinced otherwise because you're incorrigible and stubborn. From @David Frum, blue checkmark. The people who spread these rumors are impervious to fact and reason, but still, here are the facts and reason. And from the originating article on The Atlantic, across the United States, well-meaning citizens are raising awareness about very bad things epidemic that doesn't exist. @Kate_Tiffany unpacks how an internet conspiracy theory birthed a 21st century moral panic on The Atlantic article. His tweet, I have not been letting him live that tweet down.
Good.
Because it's a preposterous tweet that he tweets this in the same week of the Ghislaine Maxwell trial, in the same week of a senior producer at CNN getting arrested for very, very, very bad things. And to just come out and say, it's in your head. If you see all these things happening, who are you going to believe, me or your eyes?
Yes, get him, Viva. I love it. So we're going to be on Viva's show tomorrow, and going to be joined by Joe Neerman and Good Logic, and you can see we've got a lot to talk to. Didn't it look cold out there? Oh, my goodness. I was not envious of that cold. But Viva's doing great work, and he's calling out these people, and he did an excellent job summarizing this new narrative that is a weird narrative that's happening. It's like, don't even worry about it, It's all fake news. It's a fake epidemic. So we're going to talk about that. Viva's channel and Joe Neerman, Good Logic's channel, are both linked in the description on YouTube. So make sure you go and sub over there so you don't miss it tomorrow. We're going to do a pre-show here for 1 hour, and then we're going to all pick up and go over to Viva's house and hang out on his channel talking about Ghislaine Maxwell. All right. So we've got additional stuff to talk about. What's next? Oh, yeah. Expert witnesses. I forgot about them. Ghislaine Maxwell, her defense team, is now starting their presentation. Their case in chief is starting on Thursday, and they've got a lot of witnesses that they've disclosed to the prosecutors. Prosecutors are now a little bit upset about this, saying, we don't even know what order you're going to be presenting your witnesses, and there's 35 of them. We only called like 25 of them. You're making us look bad over here. Knock it off. And so one of the witnesses that we talked about was Robert Glassman. Robert Glassman, of course, was the attorney for Jane. Jane was one of the first victims that we heard from. Here is the mind map. Robert Glassman, if we zoom in on the victims, we can see that Jane was the first victim that we heard from. Robert Glassman is this attorney here. And so he was representing her. The defense, Maxwell's defense, they want to bring him in. They want to call him up to court, bring him in and have him testify. And the prosecution, of course, does not want that to happen. So both sides, the defense and the prosecution, the judge said, why don't you guys talk about this? Let's see if you can come to a conclusion, a stipulation about Robert Glassman, see if he can testify or not, and let us know if you can reach an agreement. Turns out, not going to happen. Prosecutors say, sorry, judge. All right, we're now respectfully submitting this letter about the question about Robert Glassman, Jane's lawyer. After considering the issue and talking with defense counsel, the government remains of the view that that email that you're talking about, it's not admissible. Accordingly, the government would not enter into a stipulation. So they're going to have to continue to fight about it. And we'll see where that issue lands. Now, we also mentioned that on yesterday's show, Bobby Sternheim said that they've got 35 witnesses. And they're having some travel problems because the U.S. prosecutors, they shut their case down after 8 days of testimony. We were all thinking that this case was going to go well into January. Going to be 6 weeks of trial. They only had 8 days or so, plus a sick day. And so now the judge wants to know what the defense is going to be doing. They issued this order today out of the Southern District of New York. Judge Nathan says the court is in receipt of the defense's letter from yesterday about the anticipated witnesses. Thank you for sending it. The government now is ordered to submit a response no later than today, by 10 p.m. tonight. So they're typing away over there right now. Government prosecutors are going through all 35 defense experts and saying, this guy's can't have him. Here's why. She, terrible. Can't have her either. One after another. Government has asked, the court has asked them to submit that by 10 p.m. The defense now is also having to provide a witness order list by later today. And we're going to be talking about the mind map expert witnesses that we know about. Because remember, there's 35 of them. But Maxwell's defense team, they gave us a little bit of a preview about who some of these expert witnesses are. And so if we go back over to the mind map, we can close a lot of this stuff out. And we can just focus here on the defense experts. Zooming in, we can see that there was an original disclosure. This was back from, I believe this was from November 24th. Yeah, so this was filed. This is part of Exhibit A. And we can just spend a quick minute taking a look at the structure of this document. So via email, this was actually, it looks like it was filed on November 15th, but it was actually sent back on November 1st. Dear counsel, sending this over to the prosecutors. This is from the defense team. Expert disclosure by the defense. So this is where all this information comes from. We've got Dr. Elizabeth Loftus. We're going to learn a lot more about her. We've got Park Dietz. We're going to learn more about him. But you can see the extent of the testimony that Dr. Dietz is intending to talk about. Okay, it's still going. We're on page 8 now. False memory, intoxication, antisocial personality disorder. We're going to come all back to this. So I just wanted to show you where this came from, and then let's break it down a little bit more. Now, so they're saying that reservation of rights, the defense reserves the right to amplify the disclosures contained in herein. Maxwell reserves the right to supplement these opinions depending upon evidence that's presented at trial. So they're talking about Dr. Rocchio. So for example, if Dr. Rocchio comes out and she's talking about grooming, which she was, then they're going to want to be able to rebut that with their own expert testimony. Okay, so let's go through some of these people. And again, this mind map is available over at watchingthewatchers.locals.com. Probably going to be making it public tomorrow, though. I've got a couple things I want to wrap up. And I also want to show you that we've added now links on YouTube to some of these. So if you actually want to go and watch the video on YouTube, you can. So like, for example, if we're talking about minor victims and you want to go see what we were talking about with Jane, you can click this link. And if you click this YouTube, it's actually going to take you to the video that I made about that testimony. So you can sort of watch the testimony that we talked about connected on the mind map. Okay, so Dr. Ryan Hall, who is this guy? We see a photograph from him, looks like a nice individual, and he's got a pretty interesting bio. From the defense disclosure, they tell us that his report is going to be about opinions, about diagnoses and opinions about a whole bunch of redacted stuff. So we don't really see what's in there. But we do learn a little bit more about this guy. Forensic evaluations, he's got criminal responsibility history, head injury evaluations, general psychiatry, forensic psychiatry, major depression, obsessive depression, pharmacology, all of that. We also know that he interviewed somebody who was connected to this case pretty intensely. And so we have talked about this before the government presented their evidence, but now that they have presented their evidence, maybe we can sort of piece a couple things together. Dr. Hall's testimony, the defense is saying this is why he should be allowed to come in. Maxwell's lawyers say the government is challenging him and his testimony, but he should be allowed to come in. He's eminently qualified. He conducted an independent medical examination of redacted, and we don't know who he's talking about there. Who did he talk about? His 100-page detailed report and his 6-hour interview of somebody is unquestioned and unquestionable. The government, they can see why the government is so eager to preclude Mr. Hall's testimony. So he interviewed somebody for 6.5 hours, and he wrote a 108-page report. So who would that be? Okay, could it be Jane? Could it be Kate? Could it be Carolyn? Could it be Annie? We don't know. But 6.5 hours, 108 pages, and the U.S. government does not want him to come in and talk. That's Dr. Hall. We also have Bennett Gershman. Now, Bennett Gershman is going to come out. This is a prosecutorial integrity person. From the defense disclosure, they tell us that he's been around since 1976. Visiting professor, a number of different locations, but he really focuses on prosecutorial misconduct. The prosecutors are bad people. He is a leading authority on misconduct and the author of the treatise Prosecutorial Misconduct, a preeminent resource for scholars and practitioners, which I actually need to buy that book. Didn't even realize that was a thing. We expect Professor Gershman to provide testimony on best practices to ensure the integrity of any prosecution, focusing on the investigation, witness preparation, media contact, neutrality, provide accurate information, and relationship with the victims of crimes. So Bennett Gershman, this guy, he's just going to come out and talk about how the prosecutors really screwed this case up so badly. His background here, he's written 4 books, over 75 articles and law review articles, op-ed pieces. Originally published his treatise back in 1985. Now it's in a second edition. Continuously called upon, quoted by the New York Times, Washington Post, outstanding professor of the year, and the list goes on and on. Okay, so he's going to come out and talk about just how awful the prosecutors are. We have Robert Kelso. He's going to be a computer forensics guy. We bring him in. He's going to talk about, 25 years background, bachelor, master's degree, professor, University of Denver, teaching computer forensics, hold multiple computer forensic certifications. He's going to testify about user data associated with the devices seized and with the government's team in this case. Documents, photographs, anything extracted from the devices, metadata. He's going to testify about computer forensic principles, the creation of documents, storage, retrieval of documents, including the limits to the information that come out of the metadata. He's going to have rebuttal testimony. He's going to go back against Stephen Flatley, and he seems like he's pretty competent. We've got this guy, John Lopez. Couldn't find a photo of him. Little bit from him. He was a former IRS agent from the Criminal Investigation Division of the IRS. He was there for 25 years. So he worked on complex fraud, corruption, bribery, tax evasion, money laundering, runs his private organization now, and he's going to talk about all of the financial stuff. So remember, when we were taking a look at the mind map, that there was a huge portion of, what's going on here? A huge portion of the government witnesses were all transactional in nature. Remember these guys? Daniel Besselson, he was the Interlochen School of Arts. Paul Kane, I believe he was the other School of Arts, the Professional Children's School in New York. J.P. Morgan, we had the FedEx paralegal, MVD employee. So these are all records. And the defense is going to bring out multiple people to just, smash those up a bit. So John Lopez, former IRS agent, is going to do that. Gerald Laporte, Jennifer Nasso, these are 2 people who are also going to do document analysis, right? Photographs and all that stuff. They're just going to shred them to bits. You can see Gerald Laporte, director of research, testified as an expert witness in numerous cases, received numerous documents pursuant to a defense subpoena. When these documents are disclosed, defense will have them analyzed and present testimony as needed. So we have more redactions about what he's going to testify to, but more documents. Jennifer Nasso, same thing. She's here talking about forensic document analysis, 15 years of experience. Her testimony is going to be limited to, redacted. Documents may require analysis. Defendant is going to have them analyzed. And so what they're talking about here sort of in real time are using these experts every time the government submits an exhibit or a new document or new testimony comes out. These people are in real time taking those exhibits and analyzing them and coming up with new defenses. And so they're saying, we don't really even know what they're going to talk about, but they're ready. And if the government is presenting, things to the jurors as exhibits, whether it's evidence, whether it's a massage table, whether they're boots. I know we got boots admitted in this trial. People are going to be analyzing that as it comes up in real time. The documents, we've got those two people on the Maxwell team. Now, the two big witnesses, expert witnesses, are going to be these two people. We've got Dr. Elizabeth Loftus, and she's really talking about false memories. And then we have Park Dietz, who's talking about forensic psychiatry. And remember, from Bobby Sternheim's opening statement, what was the theme of this trial? Money, manipulation, and memory. You got it. And so these two people are going to come in here and talk about false memories. In particular, Dr. Elizabeth Loftus. Very interesting that she's a female. Going to come in here and talk about all of these victims not remembering anything, being full of it. Dr. Loftus says, let's see, she's the distinguished professor of psychological science and law out of University of California in Irvine, one of the nation's leading experts in the science of memory. In addition to her experience as an academic and a clinical researcher, she's been an expert witness in a number of cases, hundreds of cases. Extensive experience are all recited in her CV. She's a psychologist. She specializes in the study of memory. She's going to focus on the memory aspects of this case based on her education, training, and experience. Her testimony is going to talk about human memory. More specifically, the effects of suggestion on memory, the mechanism of creation of false memories, the characteristics of false memories, how memory fades and weakens over time, how memory becomes more vulnerable to contamination. She's going to describe scientific research showing that false memories can be described with confidence, with detail, and with emotion, just like real memories. This can even occur, and when people come to believe that these experiences, they don't even think they're lying. Dr. Loftus would identify some suggestive activities that occurred in the current case. So you see what she's saying now? Dr. Loftus is going to come in and say, yeah, the government was basically planting these memories. They were inceptioning these memories into these women's heads. And guess what? Who else is going to talk about the impropriety of what the government did? Oh, well, this guy, we already talked about him earlier, Bennett Gershman, prosecutorial integrity. So you're going to have that 1-2 combo. Gershman's going to come in and say, they did all these things a little bit abnormally. And then Loftus is going to come in and say, oh, well, there's a ripple effect. It's kind of like the butterfly effect. That has a cascading consequence. And you know what that means? Those memories are not reliable anymore. Everything that Jane got up there and talked about, everything that Annie Farmer was really persuasive about, not so valuable. It's all made up. And they can't even tell. They don't even know the difference. They're sitting there communicating to you, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, and they're thinking that they're telling you the truth. They can't even recognize that it's not reality. They believe it to be real, so they're not lying. But it's just not accurate, is what she's going to say. And then our last big expert witness that they're fighting over, they're trying to get all these people from testifying. Park Dietz, MD forensic psychiatry. This guy has a very, very long list of credentials. He's a psychiatrist specializing in forensic psychiatry, 40 years of experience. Cornell University, Johns Hopkins, he's got masters, he's got everything. Chief fellow in forensic psychiatry, clinical professor for a long period of time, Harvard Law School. He's given lectures all over the place, sharp guy. We take a look. These are some of the cases that he's worked on. Okay, serial killers, including Jeffrey Dahmer, Gerald Gallego, Robert Burdea. We've got a son of Sam, Douglas Daniel Clark, different workplace massacres, various school shootings, attacks at the White House, Capitol. We've got abortion clinics, war crimes. I mean, everything. Bombers, FBI, top 10 few. The whole list goes on and on. Park Dietz has a long, long record of work in this space. Now, let's take a look at what else they're talking about. So if we go back to this document, you can see that it's just not that simple. Park Dietz, we can see he's got big chunks of testimony that he's anticipated to talk about. So specifically, rebutting Dr. Rocchio. She was talking about grooming. She gave us that 5-step framework that we talked about. He's going to come back and basically take that apart one by one. Dr. Dietz, they say, he's aware of no authority, no journals, no studies, no tests, nothing to support a theory of grooming by proxy. Such a theory doesn't have any acceptance anywhere. He's taking Dr. Rocchio's testimony apart right now, saying that her opinion that individuals with vulnerabilities are targeted. He says this is a commonly accepted bit of clinical lore. It's derived from frequent observation of highly vulnerable children. So step one from Dr. Rocchio was, well, you got to identify them first. You got to go to schools. You got to go to this, that, and the other. And he's saying it's a myth. You know, it's other explanations is what he's saying. Also talking about hindsight bias. Many claims of abuse, he says, involve behaviors that are, in hindsight, labeled grooming, but it's biased. It's hindsight. Wasn't actually that thing. It's people programming that. Also talking about the halo effect. Halo effects, he says, achieve cognitive consistency, so people will adjust their thoughts in order to get in alignment with other people. It spreads. They call it the halo effect. False assault allegations, and the list goes on. You can see false memory, intoxication, antisocial personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, histrionic personality disorder. So all of these things have their own checklists. So maybe somebody has histrionic personality disorder. Maybe they're not groomed. Maybe Dr. Rocchio comes out and says it's these five elements for grooming. If you check every one of them, you got it. Maybe Park Dietz comes out and says, well, you've got histrionic personality disorder if you have these 5 things, and you just match those 5 things up with exactly what the victim sounded like on one of the stand, when they were on the stand, when one of the victims was on the stand. So a lot of expert witnesses, and this is just a handful. We just are taking just a quick overview. This is what has already been disclosed. A lot of people are going to be testifying under pseudonyms or first names. And so we'll see what else comes out. But you can see, looking like it's going to be forceful. A lot of expert witnesses coming out on the Ghislaine Maxwell trial. And so, once again, if you want to poke around any of this, feel free to do that. Join up over at watchingthewatchers.locals.com, where you can get access to all the mind maps that we have. Let's see who's here. Guest number 9's in the house. Shout out to guest number 9 who's browsing this. Okay, and so we've got more to talk about with the Ghislaine Maxwell trial. Our last segment of the day, Prince Andrew, his defense attorneys are now asking for a motion to dismiss in the lawsuit brought against him by Virginia Giuffre, or Guffrey. Don't know that one. But here is the photograph that a lot of people have been constantly pointing back to because it's not a good one. You can see here, this is Prince Andrew, the Duke of York is my understanding, here with a very young looking girl who is Virginia Giuffre. And look who's over her left shoulder back there. It's the one and only Ghislaine Maxwell, and it's sort of a pseudo turtleneck, whatever that thing is. And so this is from the lawsuit that was filed by Virginia Giuffre, this woman, towards Prince Andrew. From her original lawsuit, it says that Prince Andrew abused her back in the New York mansion. During this encounter, Maxwell forced the plaintiff, a child at the time, and another person to sit in Prince Andrew's lap, and he touched her. During his visit to New York, Andrew forced the plaintiff into engage in bad activities. And so this has been a whole separate wing of the Ghislaine Maxwell case that we haven't spent much time on. And let's get our bearings straight on this. Let's take a look at the Virginia Giuffre wing of the mind map, which is something that I just added today. So you can see here that we've got all of the Ghislaine Maxwell stuff that's sort of on the right side of the mind map. And so we can close some of this up just so that we can see and stay organized a little bit. We can close out some of those expert witnesses we just talked about and really focus on the Jeffrey Epstein side of the equation. And so when we zoom in here, we can see that Virginia Giuffre is really intimately involved in a lot of this. Virginia Giuffre has been very, very aggressive with this. She's sort of the subject of a Netflix series, and there's been a lot of stuff that has come out of her lawsuits, including criminal charges for Ghislaine Maxwell. Those 2 perjury charges that she is facing, those are for lying during depositions when she was being deposed as a result of these lawsuits. So Virginia Giuffre, and this is the lawsuit that we're talking about. So we now know she's got several different lawsuits that are flying around out there. Two in particular. One going against Alan Dershowitz. This is the 2019 defamation case, and it's Virginia Giuffre versus Alan Dershowitz. And if you take a look, you can actually see what the complaint is here. So once again, if you're browsing the mind map, you can click this and read through it. But she filed this. She said this is a defamation lawsuit, basically saying that Alan Dershowitz is defaming her. Okay, so not a criminal charge or criminal allegations. These are civil lawsuits. And so this is 28 pages long. Of course, you're free to read it if you'd like. But what they're saying here is Dershowitz is making knowingly false and malicious and defamatory statements. That he said the story is flatly made up. It's false. And Virginia Roberts and Giuffre and all these people are making everything up. I never met her. I never slept with her. She simply made up the entire story for money. And so Alan Dershowitz is out there just sort of saying that Giuffre is a liar. And so she is suing him for defamation, saying, no, I'm not. You did meet me. You did sleep with me. I didn't make any of this stuff up. You're defaming me. And that lawsuit is still pending. And so this was that same lawsuit that yesterday we listened to Ian Maxwell. Ian Maxwell, Ghislaine's brother, is very interested in that lawsuit. So that is working its way through the courts right now. And if you want links to it, you can click this court listener website and you can follow it along. You can even you can turn on notifications. And so if there are updates in that case, you can be notified about them. That's what I do. We also have this lawsuit, which is what we're going to be looking at, because this lawsuit with Prince Andrew, of course, that's that photograph that we just looked at. Not a good one. And this is the lawsuit. So this is a battery, and it's called IIED. This is the intentional infliction of emotional distress. And this lawsuit is here. We can see this complaint. This was filed back on August 9th of 2021. So this is a new one this year, going against Prince Andrew, the Duke of York. Virginia Giuffre now filing against the Prince of England, Duke of York, or however they categorize it over there. So again, talking about abuse from when she was under the age of 18, talking about Epstein trafficking her around. She was only 16 years of age at the time. And so if you go through it, you're going to see a lot of the same stuff that we've talked about. They detail some of the travels. You can see she's flying all back and forth between number of different cities. You've got London, Paris, Granada, Tangier, Virgin Islands, San Antonio, Santa Fe, St. Louis, New York, all over the place. And Prince Andrew was somebody who took advantage of her. There's the photograph from the complaint, and we have 2 different charges or 2 different counts. First cause of action is battery. That's the physical contact that took place with Prince Andrew. And then we have the second cause, the intentional infliction of emotional distress. He was 40 years old. She was 16. He knew that this was going to cause her severe emotional distress. He did it anyways. Signed off on by David Boies. This is that lawsuit. So we can see that this is where all this is emanating from. And for a long time, shout out to guest 9, for a long time, we have Prince Andrew has been kind of just quiet about this whole thing, not really talking too much about any of it. And then we see his team respond. This is an update from this court docket and this lawsuit. And there's a couple interesting things here about the prince. Once again, this is Prince Andrew's lawsuit. We have some lawyers that are making their way in. And then we get this order on 12/14, which is today. The judge comes out and says, we're going to release some documents to the public here by January 3rd, unless you give us good reason not to do so. Judge says, in the absence of a showing on or before December 22nd, of good cause by a party, we're going to be releasing these documents, the entire document, in fact, on the public record on or about January 3rd, 2022. And so what the heck are they talking about? Well, this is what the order says. There were several different settlement agreements that took place. We talked about Virginia Giuffre suing Alan Dershowitz. Remember this one? We just reviewed that one. And Virginia Giuffre also suing Prince Andrew, the Duke of York. So there was an order that came out as to both of these cases. These are two separate lawsuits. She's suing them both for two different causes of action. Prince Andrew, battery, intentional infliction of emotional distress. Alan Dershowitz, defamation. The order from the judge, both judges, you can see Loretta Preska and Lewis Kaplan, they signed off on this thing. They are in agreement on this, which you don't see too often, sort of a joint order like this for two cases. It says, a document entitled, quote, a settlement agreement and general release, which was said to have been previously executed by Jeffrey Epstein, was filed under seal in this case. Okay, so let's make sure we're very clear about this. There was a settlement agreement that was entered in the Alan Dershowitz case. The same document has been submitted in the Virginia Giuffre case. Both have been filed under seal. Now we know that Mr. Epstein is dead. The document is well known to Ms. Giuffre, and although under seal, has been available to all parties in these cases for some time. So that settlement agreement that was entered in both these cases, it's been around for a long time. Epstein's dead. Giuffre knows about it. Judges are saying, well, we question whether any proper purpose would be served by the continued secrecy of this document. Maybe save perhaps the dollar amount of the settlement it provided for. So the judges are wondering, why are we still having this sealed? It's been sealed for a long time. Epstein's dead. Giuffre knows all about it. Sounds like it might be an important document that maybe the public should have their eyeballs on. Maybe except for the dollar amount. But it sounds like there was a settlement here. So the judge says, all right, well, listen, accordingly, in the absence of a showing of good cause by either party as to why we should not make these public, we are going to make them public on January 3rd, 2022. So ordered. So we may get our eyes on some additional documents next year in January, if they cannot come up with a reason as to why we shouldn't see those settlement documents. So Giuffre presumably entered into a settlement with Andrew or with Dershowitz and Epstein and the estate. Settlements are happening all over the place. We have not been able to see it yet, but it looks like it might be coming soon, and we're going to be excited when we see it, see what those terms were. All right. Now, Prince Andrew, his attorneys are not just going to sit there idly by and say, well, we're just going to, settle with you, Giuffre. No, of course not. They're fighting this hard. In fact, they filed a motion to dismiss the entire lawsuit. They want this thing gone. They filed that yesterday, December 13th, 2021. You can see it's 11 pages. There's a lot of law in it. And so we won't spend too much time reading, but we do have some information here. A reply in support of the defendant's motion to dismiss. So this is the defendant, Prince Andrew, Duke of York, and they want this case gone. So the way this works is they file an original motion to dismiss. The plaintiff here, Virginia, is going to file a response, and then the government replies to the response. So this is sort of the final motion here, and this is what they're saying. They're saying, we need to make this go away. They start, for someone who claims that the release she signed in 2009 is irrelevant to this case, which is what Giuffre did, she devotes a significant portion trying to avoid its application according to its plain terms. In other words, this agreement should settle this, but it doesn't. They go on, they say Giuffre does not challenge the authenticity of the release. She can't. Her counsel gave her a copy. Contrary to her mischaracterizations, Andrew does not ask the court to analyze the party's intent. And so what they say here is the court should not permit Giuffre's arguments to distract from the real issues. They say Giuffre's ignoring the language of the New York law. And they say that Giuffre's opposition confirms that her intentional infliction is duplicative of her battery claim. Okay, so she's got these two claims that are going on, and they're saying that they're duplicative. They're basically the same thing. calling her accusations conclusory, saying she's changing her story. Whatever motivates her, they say that her complaint is deficient and it fails to state a claim. So we'll just take a look at some of the big highlights here. They say that the release agreement that she signed precludes her from suing. She entered into a term. She entered into an agreement. Remember the settlement agreement that we're going to learn about in January? Whatever the settlement was, should settle it, is what they're saying. On a motion to dismiss, the court may properly consider matters subject to judicial notice. She faces no prejudice. And so they say that the motion to dismiss should be granted. Guffrey says that the release, I'm sorry, somebody just corrected me. It's Giuffre. Giuffre says the release is not subject to judicial notice because it's been filed under seal. So they're fighting about this notice and about when it's going to be publicly available. We get a little bit of redaction stuff here. Giuffre tries to manufacture a dispute, they say. Giuffre does not dispute that she signed a release to settle this. She signed some sort of an agreement with the Epstein action. She received some money. She got some money in exchange for something. We don't know what it is. There's no evidence that Giuffre sought to rescind the release. It's also too convenient that after accepting, a certain amount of money, I'm sure, probably millions of dollars from Epstein, Giuffre now refuses to be bound by the very obligations that constituted considerations for the money. When they talk about consideration, it's like, what did you get? It's like you're giving something for it. In this case, Giuffre got a bunch of money. What is she giving up? The right to file a claim. Now she's filing a claim. Well, she got a bunch of money in order to not do that. So why is she allowed to do it? They're saying she shouldn't be. Prince Andrew's defense lawyers are saying just interpret the plain language of the release. Just read it. It's pretty obvious what it says. It's part of the Epstein Victims Compensation Program. It's part of getting compensated. You give up your claims. The release agreement's plain language reflects the parties' intent to provide direct and substantial benefits to third parties. A lot of case law here. Giuffre is saying that she never intended to release Prince Andrew. But they say in the agreement, it's pretty obvious. In its plain terms, the agreement, they say, embodies the parties' intent to benefit directly and substantially a class of persons of which Prince Andrew is a member. And so we can't see this stinking document, but apparently that settlement, they're saying it includes Prince Andrew. And Giuffre is saying, no, it doesn't include Prince Andrew. When I signed this document, I never once intended to sort of preclude Prince Andrew from this. She settled this claim with Epstein and the Epstein Compensation Victims Fund. And Maxwell was a part of that. But not everybody who was a John in this thing. The settlement agreement includes everybody who used the services as well, meaning any of these victims can't. They settled with Epstein. Okay, maybe they can't sue him or his estate because they got compensation for that. But she's not suing Epstein. He's dead. She's not suing Maxwell. She's facing criminal charges. She's suing Prince Andrew. Why is he being protected by that settlement agreement is what she's saying. And we can't see what it says or who the settlement agreement was between. The defense here for Prince Andrew says he was in a class of persons. He's in a class of men who, traffic in underage children. And so as part of the settlement, it includes all of the men in that bucket who just get protected because they're in that bucket, is what they're saying. It's in the agreement. And she signed it. So she shouldn't be allowed to continue to bring this forward. And they're telling you, Prince Andrew, he falls within that class of, I'd call them, pedos, I guess. Giuffre's allegation, both in Epstein's action and here, compelled the conclusion that Prince Andrew, because the allegations, right? The allegations are that he is basically a pedo. And they're saying the allegations alone put him in that class. Prince Andrew is, in fact, somebody who's facing allegations of this type of nefarious activity. And that puts him in that bucket. Therefore, he is precluded from actions because he's in a protected class. Giuffre alleged that Andrew was aware of, complicit in, traveled a number of times. She suffered harm as a result. Giuffre alleges that Andrew knew she was a victim. He knew she could not consent. And so that puts him in that class. That puts him in that bucket. The plain language, the defense says, of the release agreement grants redacted, redacted, redacted. The settlement agreement, which we hopefully get to see in January, grants something. Neither the allegations in the Epstein action nor the personal jurisdiction. Taking a look at some other law. Yeah. Here, Giuffre's allegations about Prince Andrew and his travel to Florida, and the travel to Florida, which was a headquarters for the scheme, established the requisite minimum contacts for the purposes of due process. All right. Then we see the Epstein Victims Compensation Fund release is a red herring, does not change the legal analysis of the release agreement. As a Hail Mary, they say, Giuffre attaches an unauthenticated 2020 agreement to her opposition without any formal request, and she claims that her receipt of redacted, her receipt of, $1 million or whatever the money was, somehow reflects the intent of a 2009 agreement. So they're just fighting over this agreement. These types of claims are barred by time. Also saying that it's disingenuous, that Prince Andrew, yeah, okay. So the rest of this is pretty much kind of some boring legal stuff here. Then they talk about the age of consent. This is interesting. Lack of consent is established as a matter of law for individuals who were under the age of 17 at the time, like Giuffre, who were between the ages of 17 and 18. Lack of consent is an element of Article 130. Giuffre and others, not too much good there. Calling these types of claims highly subjective and hampered by the passage of time. Memories fade. False memories are created. Witnesses die or otherwise become unavailable. Here, the only witnesses to the purported implied threats under which Giuffre allegedly engaged in acts with Prince Andrew and Epstein deceased, Maxwell incarcerated, Andrew the accused, and Giuffre herself. According to Giuffre's tortured interpretation, it revives civil claims. Yeah, and that this is not a reasonable mechanism. It's a duplicative claim. And then we get a conclusion. For the foregoing reasons, Prince Andrew and his defense attorneys respectfully request the court dismiss the complaint without leave to amend. Signed off on by Lavley and Singer. Melissa Lerner, over from a law firm in California representing Prince Andrew, the Duke of York. So, saying specifically, there was a settlement agreement that was entered into, and as part of those terms, Prince Andrew identified himself in a bucket of individuals that were covered under the umbrella of the settlement agreement. And therefore, he can't be sued because Virginia Giuffre signed the settlement agreement. And so we'll see what the judge has to say about that. Is the judge going to dismiss the entire case and make sure or hold the settlement agreement to be dispositive and resolve the whole thing? If so, then Alan Dershowitz's case might go away too. Or we may just see a denial. And this case moves forward. We see that the actual settlement agreement gets published later in January. And we're going to be able to dive into that, of course. And so let's take a look at what you have to say about all of this stuff over at watchingthewatchers.locals.com. I've seen a couple super chats come in over on YouTube. Shout out. Thank you for the support there, my YouTube friends. We've got AV equals adult video. Sleazy term for vid store days. Adult video. I was thinking audio visual, like AV cables. But you're right. Nick Thrain with a super chat. No question. Thanks for the donation there, Nick. Marzi Pana with another donation. Thank you, Marza. And Nick Thrain with another one and another one. He says Virginia's name is pronounced Giuffre. Sorry, I had to do it. I love the content. Well, thank you for correcting me. I got no problems. I'll fix it. No problem. So Giuffre, I'll try to keep that handy. And those were over from watchingthewatchers.locals. Those were from YouTube. Now we're going over to watchingthewatchers.locals.com. And let's see what you have to say about this. We've got news now. Says, for those wanting your Kim Potter fix. Yeah, there's a lot of people out there on Locals. You're like, Rob, hello, dum-dum. We're tired of Ghislaine Maxwell. Can you talk about Kim Potter? And the answer, unfortunately, is no. There's not enough time in the day. I just can't do it. I would love to, but there's not enough time in the day. So we're going to have, of course, recommendations on that. Nick Rekieta. That's the only one. Go over to his channel. He's covering Kim Potter all day, every day. I don't know how he has so much energy, but he does. And so go check him out for that. Or get your updates from News Now Wyoming. News Now Wyoming is covering this. Says, so far, the prosecutor asked a lot of witnesses to defend their Blakely factors, which are used for aggravated sentencing by the judge. Most witnesses have not testified on the investigation into the shoot. All cop witnesses that were there testified that she was authorized to use deadly force. Today, they did bring in their use of force expert and trainer. He was a very reluctant witness and barely answered the prosecutor's questions. He did say her use of force was unreasonable. Defense gets to cross him tomorrow, so that will be a testimony to watch. And so, yeah, so Nick Ricade is covering it. News Now Wyoming is covering it. He's on YouTube as well, and he gave us a very nice summary at our monthly meetup. Interesting case. I'm sorry I can't cover both of them. Monster One says, I wish people like Rogan and Tim Pool could do basic fact-checking. That trial tracker was taken down because they were stealing reporting from people like Good Logic and Inner City Press. People are getting in line at 4 a.m. to get in the courthouse, and those a-holes just copy and paste other people's work. Yeah, I think it was not really even about that one particular Twitter account. Like, that's the one that they saw, which I agree, that Twitter account is not any good. I mean, it really is just reposting a bunch of stuff. I don't check it at all when I'm doing my prep because it's nothing really good other than just reposting what a lot of other people are posting. So I'm with you on that one, Monster One. But the bigger point, and really what Joe Rogan was talking about, was the issue about the hard drives with the open evidence seals and the idea that maybe Epstein had a bin of evidence that was handed to him, maybe by some government prosecutor or investigator. I don't know. T. Blakemore says, I am rewatching the comedy show Joe Rogan was on in the 90s called News Radio. It's so hard to believe that Joe Rogan has become this superstar, quote, radio personality. There was an episode of News Radio where Joe, an electrician in the show, gets a chance to go on air as a radio host, and he did so well, everyone felt threatened by him. Perhaps that was a bit of foreshadowing. Thank goodness Joe is willing to question the insanity going on right now. He has really led the way in building a grassroots media platform. Absolutely true. Joe Rogan is a phenomenon. No doubt about it. No doubt about it. He's doing something that's very awesome. He's an inspirational guy. Sergeant Bob says, nice explanation of why evidence is open and resealed, etc. What the watchers should know is that every person opening, examining, resealing evidence must write a report and log what and why they did. I was a supervisor in the PPB crime scene unit for 7 years, and this was critical. If the chain of evidence is broken, the defense has a field day. He's right about that. We love that. Chain of custody problems, we're like, oh, are you serious? Is it Christmas morning? Are we going to Disneyland tomorrow? There's a chain of custody problem. This is amazing. It's like Christmas in July. It's a good thing for a defense attorney when there is a problem with chain of custody. And so that's why police are very, very detailed with that. They want to make sure that they keep that locked. And again, it's this concept that you are tracking where everything goes. So let's say, you have a pizza. You give pizza from person A to person B to person C to person D to person E. And when it gets to person F, there's a slice of pizza missing. And you go, that's son of a B. Nobody was supposed to eat that yet. And you go back through the log and you say, where'd that slice of pizza go missing? Who took that one? And you find out it was that freaking B, as always. It's always B. And so you can go back and you can dissect the problem with the evidence. And that's what defense attorneys are doing. Sergeant Bob says, typical, quote, beat up the witnesses strategy. Totally. Yeah, they're just going to put one witness after the other and just keep going. And it's going to be a war of attrition, and they've got the money and the experts and the resources to do it. Sergeant Bob says, nasty behavior has been the part of royalty for centuries. I've read a lot of British history. The real bloodlines are so confused due to many adventurous escapades. From Sergeant Bob. Good stuff. Miles Away says, don't you love it? False memories. Suppress real evidence and then wage expert word warfare on the prosecution's witnesses. Apropos to the times we slog through. Quote, a better call Saul defense. Don't you like lawyering? Isn't it fun? And it's really all like true, right? You can go back and you can have all these studies. You can see why people kill each other over, medical information and stuff. Spawn Dog says, are the Clintons and Prince Andrew donating to the Maxwell's defense fund? Bill and these dirtbags' belief must be grass on the... Spawn Dog. Sergeant Bob says, we wonder, where did Epstein's money come from? Was it all high-profile pimping? I don't think so, Sergeant Bob. There's a story there where he kind of took it all from this ultra billionaire. Sort of used his charisma to weasel his way up into his organization and then just took off with like $50 million or $200 million or something like that. Nobody really knows, I think, specifically, but that's the story. Kincaid says, evening, Rob. I am unsure about Epstein's death, but my gut says Dershowitz did something. Could there be new charges considering the settlement and Allen's talent? It would be interesting to develop some real discoveries. Also, if he got jammed up, what secrets could he reveal? Well, I don't know. Dershowitz has been very consistent on this. Very consistent. I've never touched. I got a massage, but I kept my underwear on. That whole story. I don't know. I'm a presumption of innocence person, and I'm a defense attorney. You know who else is a defense attorney? Alan Dershowitz. So I don't know what to do about that. But the settlement agreement will come out, and we'll see what's in there, and then maybe we'll have some insight on that one. All right, we've got Rad says, I'm sorry if you answered this question already. If Prince Andrew's case is dismissed, will the other claims be dismissed also? Example, Clinton Gates if one is filed. I mean, I would think so if it's part of the same settlement agreement. I mean, if the settlement agreement a judge finds is inclusive enough to cover all those underlying claims, and it's the same settlement agreement, and they can make the same argument that Prince Andrew did. I'm a part of that same bucket of people that was using those services. I'm protected as a part of the settlement. I mean, they signed away their rights. They can't file any more civil suits against us. So that would be the argument that they would make, and maybe they would win. Thunder7 is here, says, Rob, I only caught the last 10 minutes of the show, so apologies if you talked about this. The judge in that case has ordered the agreement with Virginia to be made public on December 22nd. So it's actually going to be on January 3rd, I believe. But they have to respond by December 22nd. Timing is strange, but will it enable Prince Andrew to wiggle out of any of the charges? Virginia wasn't the only minor that he slept with. Many more on the island, those are not covered under this agreement. Yeah, so I think that would be right. The settlement agreement would be only applicable to the person who entered into it. So like Virginia Giuffre would not be able to enter a settlement on behalf of all of the other victims, right? They would have to waive their rights, their own. She would not be able to do that. But if I'm not mistaken, I think that she said it was, let's scroll back on this puppy. I had the docket. Yeah, here it is. The court will file the entire document on the public record on or about January 3rd. So next year is when we'll see it, but they have until the December 22nd to show good cause. Otherwise, if they don't, then on January 3rd, it will be coming out. So it's a good question. That was from Thunder7. And I believe that is it for us for the day, my friends, and we're right on time. And so I want to thank you for being a part of the show. We talked a lot of Ghislaine Maxwell. Tomorrow, very likely that we're going to be releasing the mind map out into the wild. I've got a couple final things I want to make some changes to. And then tomorrow, we're going to do just a quick pre-show. So we'll talk some headlines. We'll do a kind of an open forum Q&A for 1 hour from 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. Arizona time, which is going to be 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. on the East Coast. Eastern time. And so do your math accordingly. From 6 to 7 on the Eastern time. 6 to 7 Eastern time. Pre-show here, 7 onward. We're going over to Viva's channel. We're going to his house, and so make sure you subscribe. Both Viva's channel and Joe Neerman, Good Logic, his channel are down, linked below. And we're going to talk all Ghislaine Maxwell on Viva Stream. We might even take a look at the mind map. I hope you join us for that, because it's going to be a lot of fun. So that is going to be it for us for the day, my friends. Thank you so much for being here, for being a part of the show. We're going to see you same time, same place tomorrow for 1 hour. Then it's Viva's after that. Not applicable. Sent in one final super chat before we wrap it up for the day. It says, try them under the higher law, like at Nuremberg. You talking about all the Epstein people? I'm not sure how that would work, but I like the idea. I want to thank everybody once again for being a part of the program. Thank you, all the mods out there, keeping control of the chat and for making it a lot of fun to participate in the program. Everybody have a tremendous evening. Sleep very well. I'll see you right back here tomorrow. Bye-bye.